Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho, and tonight is our ongoing series of Occult and Crochet, where I talk about the current project I'm working on and then we go into somebody from the occult. And I've been working on this shawl for a while and I was hoping to have it finished by now. It's not quite happening, but this is where we're at as far as the colors go. It's actually almost done. It goes up into purple, so I'm almost done there. So, but it's getting to be pretty large overall. I mean, I'm not going to stand up and show that, but it's a very large, it's going to be a very large shawl, but it's going to be all cotton, so it's going to be pretty lightweight, which will be nice. So, there's the crochet update for the week. But our topic of conversation is going to be a little bit more sinister than a nice butterfly or dragonfly styled shawl. And that is, we're going back into the dark old days where we're going to meet a very unique witch hunter. Not a fan of witch hunters in general. I think they're all scam artists and we're up for a whole bunch of evil things. But this one caught my attention as I was digging through the piles of names that I have acquired over the time I've been studying these things. And the reason that this particular one is unique is it's actually a woman. And that's the part that stuck out to me, is like, wait, what? A female witch hunter by the name of Christian Caldwell. What's interesting is even by the name, you would have assumed that that was going to be a male name with witch hunters. I'm still on the witch hunter kick. I've got probably a good 6 or 7 more before I'm completely done with this for as far as I'm concerned. But if you have more names, let me know. I will keep digging into this, because this topic is a weird one, because I don't know, in today's society, it's such an odd thing to be so blindly able to follow something like this and be okay with it. I don't know, it was weird. So we'll hop in. The weird thing about this time period and where it's at, it takes place in Scotland, which is cool, but there's not much said about her youth or her growing up. It pretty much just hops into the fact that she wanted to start hunting witches because she witnessed a witch hunt and a witch trial, and it just fascinated her and she wanted to be involved. And this was really not okay with the church of the day. Women were to be hunted as witches, not to be hunters. And I don't say that lightly. They really did not think that women were smart enough, good enough, fill in the blank enough to actually go hunting witches. And the references during that time were vile on top of everything else. So not a good time to be a woman, and especially wanting to do this type of a job. But Christian found a way around this. She dressed as a man. And the term I ran across multiple times was she was the cross-dressing witch hunter. Yeah, this can't go anywhere but wrong. So she was from the area of Moray or Elgin in the country of Scotland, as I mentioned before. So, let me get my pictures. This is one of the most intriguing pictures that I could find of that area. And Moray is actually on a inlet. So there's like a big bay almost, but it's way bigger than that. And so this is one of the fog is rising off of it. I just was looking at pictures for Moray, and this one I ran across. I'm like, perfect. We're talking about witch trials. This looks nice and witchy. So, and then this was one of the churches that I found. And I'm sorry, I am obsessed with these old churches because the architecture and the structure are so cool. So, anyway, we're not talking about that. Christian used a fake name to add to her new disguise, where she cut her hair short, she, bound things that were a little larger than they needed to be for a man, and so she took on a fake name, and the name that she picked, and this name just kills me, is John Dixon. And it's very generic, but also just a little bit questionable. Like, why would you pick that particular last name? But again, our modern sensibilities are probably not the same as they were back then. And once she had acquired her persona, she left her home area, which was in the area of Moray, I believe, is where she started. And then she went to the next town over where she was not well known, but she presented herself as John Dixon, and it was there that she was signed under a person named John Innes. And he was kind of a sheriff of his day, a little bit of a power broker, so someone that you wanted on your side but didn't want to actually work against, because he had some serious authority with him. And why was this such a big deal in Scotland at the time? There had been a civil war. Why is my phone going off? Go away. There had been a civil war during the late 1500s, early 1600s in Scotland, and there were wars going on all the time throughout the world, so this isn't a new thing. But because of this particular one, people, especially landowners, were in big time debt. And what's the best way to get out of debt? Especially when you have people who you have to take care of, they live on your property, they are, they're workers, but they're kind of in the way, and then you have to, again, take care of them, protect them, do all that. Obviously, you accuse them of using black magic and witchcraft. Isn't that what everyone does? So, the witch hunts in Scotland officially began in or around 1590. And side note here, or further information, however you want to look at it, during the Scottish witch hunts in particular, between 4,000 and 6,000 people were brutally tortured and murdered in the name of witchcraft, or being accused of witchcraft. And it is estimated that over 3/4 of those people were women, so between 3,000 and 5,000 people, give or take, were women. Like, what? Why are we going after all the ladies here? This is weird. But during the time, that was the suspicion. And yeah, the church was very patriarchal during that time period, and women were seen as property, not as actual people, in a lot of cases. Not all the time, but that was a big thing back between the 12th and 17th centuries, that people were weird. The church of the day, as we've talked about before, had such a heavy hold over people's minds and souls that they literally thought that the devil was everywhere. He's around that bush, he's hiding behind that couch. This was so out of control, and the accusations of witchcraft were an immediate death penalty in most cases. It was a very rare instance where if you were accused of witchcraft, you lived to tell the tale, and if you did live, you were broken, physically, sometimes mentally. But it was not a pleasant time. And when you take that and add massive financial debt to the fear, notice how fast people started getting put to the stake. So this was the environment that Christian was born into and raised with. And what did Christian want to perform when she decided she was going to join the witch hunting? Was it an inquisitor? Was it a judge? Join the clergy? No. This one got a little strange really fast when I was digging into it. She wanted to be what is called a pricker. And I'm not kidding when I say that. And I had to look it up. It's actually a term. And I'm a third grader, so the first time I read it, I started giggling like a child because I thought it was funny, and then I looked into it. This isn't funny. She wanted to be the one that pricked a witch to discover the devil's mark. And this is where we're going to kind of define some of these terms. Her pay, though, during this was 6 shillings a day to be under contract, and her contract was to be a year long, so this is significant money for that time. And for every witch that she discovered, she would get an additional £6. That was 2 years' salary for most people from one witch. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but the average pay during this time period was around 1 shilling a day. So when we're talking 6, She put herself from being poverty-ridden into the upper class real fast with this one, which was probably one of the reasons that she went into it in the first place. And guess what? There were prickers who figured out a way to make a retractable needle, we'll get into these here in a second, which would be seen as with producing no blood and leading to no injury, therefore more accusations, meaning more found witches, meaning more money in their evil, bloody pockets. And Christian was also accused of this trick as well. So, where was I? The concept of a pricker was a weird job. I literally had to do a deep dive on this because I had no idea exactly what it was. I get the concept, but I wanted to know more. So, what I found out, you get to find out. Basically, the pricker would take the person into a location. They would strip them completely nude, and they would start at the top of their head and shave every piece of hair off of their body. All of it. And once fully nude and completely shaved, the pricker would take one of a set of needles or sharp objects, usually made by the pricker themselves. Oops, helps if I hit the right button. Kind of like these little evil creatures. And they would prick the accused's body until a numb place that did not bleed was found. And these were not normal needles. This is what we're talking about here. I've got one other picture of those, just one second. But we're not talking about these. And I'm sure if you've ever done sewing, or if you've ever been around somewhere, you've either had your finger pricked with one of these or stepped on them. They're not comfortable. But let's look at an actual one from one of the witch museums. Check this out. Like this evil device had a needle that was approximately 3 to 5 inches long. That's what was being stabbed into people. Think about that. That does not look comfortable at all. And they were not thin. Their bases could be between 1/4 of an inch up to 1/2 an inch in diameter, and they would stick this needle all the way into the body to the to this spot right here. So this entire section would be stabbed into a person. These were painful tools. They are not your grandma's sewing pins. These men who would perform this task were thought to be overtly cruel and evilly sadistic, which I think those two go together, but that's where we're headed. They would purposefully prick and poke a person in a manner that would inflict the most amount of pain and damage. To me, by the end of doing the research into just the concept of the pricker, I don't think they did it for witch hunting. I think they did it because they were just evil people. I'm keeping this PC because I really am not happy with what I was finding. The dress, or the way they would dress, the dress code of a pricker, what only added to the reputation and their very feared association. They would wear a tall hat, always black, and they would wear these dark, ominous cloaks with collars. I was finding descriptions, couldn't find good images. And they looked similar to what we would see in like some Puritan preacher looks, but they didn't have the white collar around their neck, and they just carried an air of evil around them. No one wanted to look these people in the eye. You did not want to catch a pricker's attention. The attention always led to pain. There was no variance here. These people, they held them, thought we were doing God's work, but I don't know what God you were worshiping, because the ones that I know don't like pain that much. And what was so important about the numb spot? I haven't really brought this up, I don't think. And it's basically when an accused witch would make a pact with the devil. Again, this is all according to these tortured confessions. There's no evidence of this within the occult at all. The devil would place his mouth on the witch to draw out her blood, or his, and essence, which would bind the pact with the devil. That particular mark would be numb due to the evil that had touched it. So there would be no warmth in it, it'd be a cold spot. There'd be no, like, you'd touch it and you wouldn't feel anything. and it wouldn't bleed if it was pricked. That's the concept of the pricker. The devil would return often to draw on the blood or essence of the witch, always going back to the exact same mark. And in some of the references that I found, a witch mark could also be called the devil's nipple because it would show up as like a mole or a skin tag or something along those lines. Sometimes they would even be birthmarks. So if you have a birthmark, there was a chance back in that time you would be considered a witch just because you had that. Like, some were very large, others were very, very small. They were said that there were some that was as small as the pinhead on, well, I'll show you the picture. As small as these pinheads, but then there was also ones that could be as large as like full-blown birthmarks. So it was one of those things where you just didn't want to have any flaw in your skin because they would assume you're a witch. And generally the marks were found to exist within the armpits, the genital area, or around the eyes. And this one was a little twitchy to me. They also liked to lift up the eyelid and poke around underneath that because there might be a mark under there that the devil got to. You're not sticking needles around my eyes to start with, let alone that rapier you were trying to attack someone with. They also would go after various body cavities, the belly buttons, the ears, the anus, anywhere where there was a fold of skin, they were poking in there. These vile people. Anyway, this would be seen as definitive proof of a witch mark. If they found that numb spot or a spot that didn't bleed when you'd stab this, blade into it. To me, this is the dumbest way to find a witch, but these people weren't known to be bright during this time, especially with what they were doing. And heaven forbid you had a pinched nerve, because if they found that, you were a witch because there was no feeling there. And I looked into a little bit more into this for clarification. Every person has a place on their body that's a little bit less sensitive than others, and generally you can tolerate a significant amount of pain in that one spot, and it can be a patch on like your back, it can be a spot on your foot. It doesn't really matter on the person, they're all over the place basically. The other part was when a person, especially being stabbed, reaches a certain level of pain, their central nervous system actually shuts off the ability to feel pain. So the pricker could keep stabbing away, but their brain has shut off the pain receptors, so they're not going to respond to it. They'll still bleed, but they're not going to be responding to the pain sensors anymore, which would condemn you as a witch. This whole concept was just garbage if you didn't already guess that. And in that day and age, there's another side to this that's even more vile as far as I'm concerned. Female modesty in particular, but modesty in general, was held to a very high standard. They wouldn't even recommend taking off your clothes to bathe, and a lot of this time period you were bathing once a week, maybe twice a week. It was a lot of work to take a bath, so it was just, a lot of it was just convenience. There's also some beliefs that to be fully naked was to invoke the devil, so you never wanted to ever even take a bath fully nude, because it was seen as very shameful and vile. So modesty was held to a very high standard, and women in particular were very, very, very much pushed to be the most modest that they could. And part of this ritual assault of the pricker would never be done in private. It was always done in a public setting, whether it was in the town square, I couldn't even imagine, or in meeting houses, at times even in churches. What? And anyone was welcome to watch, encouraged to watch, sometimes forced to watch. Men, women, children, they were not above this. You were there to be the witnesses to the interrogation. Pleasant. These people, I flush the toilet, they're trash. Anyway, there were reports that people would admit to the charge of witchcraft in the process of being stripped or shaved just to get their clothes back on the body and hide the nudity. They would deal with the witch trial. They would burn, do not strip me naked, do not shave me. These were so vile of things to be done to a person that if they knew it was coming, they would just admit to something to keep it from happening. They didn't even want to play. This is not a time where you ever wanted to have anything unique about yourself or be different. You wanted to blend in because standing out would get you assaulted. One of Christian, our female witch hunter here, one of her assumed victims, because they didn't put a lot of names with who she hunted. She was very active for about 4 years is what it looks like, 2 to 4 years depending on what source I was rooting through. But one of her assumed victims, because her John Ines, her mentor, was in charge of this particular trial. She just happened to be documented to have been in that town during this time, so it's assumed she was involved in this person's assault, and that was Isabel Gowdy or Gody. I'm really bad with names. This witch was hunted in the area of Narren, which is around the town of Aldern. I'm again not great with names. This particular trial would occur in 1662. So around this time, Christian had been active for about 2-ish years, if not a couple years more. The dates are a little bit squirrely here. Isabel was accused of witchcraft and a most disturbing action. And the witchcraft in general was bad enough, but this particular edition was worse. She would cast deadly fever spells on children and babies in her area, and specifically on the house of her landlord. Not someone you wanted to do this to. And apparently in her confessions, she brought up the term coven, which, according to the documents that I could dig up, this was the first time this term had been used for a group of witches at a Sabbat. So, thanks to Isabel, we now have a name for a witch group, which is a coven. Isabel offered 4 different confessions over the course of several weeks. And the only reason we know that is, for some weird reason, she was really well documented, Isabel was. And I can't figure out why, except for some of the outlandish things that she said, and I was reading through a bunch of the documentation. This girl had a way to talk unless they were putting words in her mouth, which was possible. And tonight, and I'm not sponsored by this, just I love this stuff, our kombucha is the elderberry juniper. It's a very refreshing, light flavor. But anyway, back to our story. There are those who claim that severe torture wasn't used on Isabel. I just have a hard time believing that, considering how much these people like to hurt others. In these confessions, she talked about charms, verbal spells spoken in rhyme specifically, okay, and that she was a member of a devil's coven, and that she had held congress with the fairy king and queen. This last one was way worse than just being in league with the devil, especially in Scotland in this time. The fairies were something to be feared above all else, including the church. The church hadn't been able to fully squeeze the fairies out of the people, so they still were terrified of the fae folk. And this should tell you how bad this confession really was for her. For her to be in league with the fairies and with the devil, the two things the church hated the most at the time, this was damning for her. And in another part of her confession, she told stories, and I will not go into everything that she talked about. It was shocking in what she said. Let's just say that what she was talking about would make a sailor blush with shame. Passionate interactions with the master of hell, the devil himself, which would be quite the scandal just in general, and I'm sure that more than one late night solo session for the confessors after hearing all the details, because she didn't spare details. She was very fluent in what she said, which, yeah, okay. She opined of transfiguration into a jackdaw, which is kind of like a magpie. She spoke of flying through the sky on magical horses, to visit the house of the Queen of the Fairy, having drinks with the Queen, nothing dangerous about ingesting food from the fairy realm. Yeeks. And more modern views, though, of Isabel have her, because of the way it was written, and I think this is why the modern view it holds of her like this, that she was a simple, illiterate woman, but had a great imagination and had the gift of storytelling. Kind of like a bard, I guess, if you will. It's unclear whether she came forward on her own or if she was brought in. Some think this was a way for her to feel important or helpful because of all the witch trials that were going on. But it's also implied that she had a simple mind and she thought she could help with a confession. She would just jump at this chance to be seen as being helpful. There's another theory that she was part of a group of locals, because she was a little bit simple, she got wrapped up in this, who were displeased with the local minister and they were stirring things up to get rid of him. The second option would also indicate that she would have been accused probably over many months and eventually would have been brought in on charges of witchcraft. And we're still talking about Isabel here. Not much is said about her personal life outside the fact that she was married and between the ages of 32 and 50. That particular detail is assumed because in one of her confessions she talks about how for 15 years she was having some form of intercourse with the devil in a physical sense, which would say starting around the age of 13, 14, and they assumed that she was between 30 and 50 because it was also said that she was still capable of bearing children. So that's the amount of information that I could give about Isabel as far as her background. But because of Isabel and one other person's confession, which it literally says the person's name agreed with what Isabel said, and that was it, 41 people in that area were accused of witchcraft. It was surmised that she was eventually put to the stake on her own because of the things that she admitted to, but it wasn't really confirmed anywhere. It was more just implied, so take that one with a grain of salt, unfortunately. Anyway, back to Christian. Christian was involved in her interrogation, or what we would call today torture. Later, shortly after this, I should say, Christian would make a fatal error. Later that year, she was in the town of Tain, and she would make an accusation, and I could not find out why she made this particular accusation, but she made an accusation against a young man who just happened to be a messenger for the courts of the country. We're not talking about a low level between towns. We're talking like someone who actually walked into the king's courtroom, or the king's chambers. Someone that she, on this particular instance, was very full of her own power, and so she thought she could point the finger at this young man and not have anything bad happen. This person was named John Hay. John was a messenger of the courts and of the crown, but he also had some legal knowledge, and from what I could dig up on him, it kind of comes across like he might have been a paralegal aspect, like he knew enough of the law that he could actually help out the courts and help in the courts, deliver messages, and be able to speak the lingo of a courtroom. So that is actually an important tidbit here, because she would make the accusation, but John, being smart, would petition the government to arrest her based on false claims. Christian saw what was going on and decided, I've already changed my look and name once, let's do it again. So she packed up and dipped down south into southern Scotland because she heard of a clan uprising or a battle. There was a little bit of confusion, and basically what it worked out to is one clan wanted the other clan's land, so clan A decided to accuse clan B of all being witches, therefore invoking the witch hunts, calling down the courts in that area to start an inquisition to find out if there were witches in the area or not. So Isabel heard about, or not Isabel, Christian heard about this, and off she went down south. And I couldn't find pictures of Isabel or of Christian or of anyone else, So I'm going to put up a picture or two of the southern Scottish area. Like, they're just beautiful areas, so we'll go with that. When Christian returned or headed south, she changed how she appeared a little bit. The details weren't given. She still had short hair. I'm assuming she may have started to grow facial hair if she shaved enough. I don't know exactly how that worked out. But she took on the name of Mr. James Patterson. When she arrived in the southern part of Scotland, she introduced herself as Patterson the Pricker. Jokes may ensue. And it sounds ominous in the time today with something to giggle about because the name is funny. This particular uprising, though, was over land and warring factions, and they were once Clan A accused Clan B of witchcraft. Clan B turned the tables and accused Clan A. So now we have two groups that are fighting over land, accusing the other one of being witches because that was the quickest way to get the church involved and the courts. And at the courts of the time were there to hunt all witches. So if one group or the other could be confirmed to be witches, they would be executed immediately, and the other clan would be able to take over the land. There weren't a lot of witches, let's just be honest here. There was a lot of greed. So this was just a big joke, really, as far as witch hunting goes. Christian didn't shy away from this particular controversy, though. She had plunged headlong into these interrogations, and Christian would torture 14 women and 1 man in this particular set of trials. This was all local stuff to start with. Witnesses would talk of the victims being tied up by their thumbs, held above their head, and this was stuff that Christian was involved in, mind you. Remember, this is a woman doing this. Feet being burned by firebrands. Take a hot stick, stick it in a fire, get it all nice and red, and stab it on someone's foot. That's what she was doing. Whipping the victims to blood. I don't need to go into more detail. And then taking straps and tightening them around the necks of the victims. Once tortured sufficiently to find the mark, she would then put them on horseback, still naked, parade them around the town before being taken to jail. Full humiliation. Stripped naked, shaved bare, beaten, burned, choked, then tossed up on a horse, and if you've ever had horse hair in certain areas, it's very uncomfortable, and then paraded through town so everyone saw them before they went to jail. Words fail me for what kind of person this is. But her little foray into southern Scotland, I love this picture, did not end well for Christian. Up to this point, she was working strictly with the local officers of the courts and of the church. But once she had completed her tests, the reports were sent off to the big courts, you know, the ones that she worked with before. And after she had tortured and forced them to confess, the big dogs from up north came down because they were summoned to complete the trial and issue the warrant of execution. They arrived, and when they did, they were like, "Hey, aren't you the dude from up north that accused the messenger? You're in trouble still." So she was promptly arrested once the big dog showed up, because they realized that she was the one that caused all the chaos before. They still thought of this person as a man, though, because of how she was dressed, her hair was, and how she presented herself in public, and the names and all of it. They still thought she was a man. So short time later, she was being tortured, literally tortured. Good. Questioned. She was being interrogated, and it was during her torture that her true nature was revealed, because they started off kind of small, but of course they escalate things. Once they stripped her naked and discovered that he was actually a she, the accusations would roll out en masse. Christian would be accused of false accusations, obviously, causing death to innocents, unlike her captors who just killed people because they were evil or something. She would confess to not using pricking as a way to gain knowledge of witchcraft. She was just doing that for fun. She claimed that was all for the audience and for the soul of the witch, because she knew what she was doing, and if she tortured them enough, the soul would be cleaned. She discovered that a witch was a witch by looking into the person's eyes. She could see the evil, she could see the devil within them. And that actually kind of worked against her, because that was a form of witchcraft in itself. You looked into someone's eyes to, read their thoughts, and that's what she was doing. See how this doesn't work out well for her? Once the court was done with Christian, though, she would not find herself lashed to a stake with wood piled all around waiting to be burned. She would actually, and they thought this was the more humane treatment for her, be banished to the island of Barbados. She was sold, basically as a slave, to a fever-ridden plantation, and this plantation owner actually was a Puritan, and the plantation was going to work her 16 plus hours a day. That was her punishment, justified. She would leave Europe in this winter, basically, of 1663. She would arrive sometime around May of 1663, and it could take up to 3 to 4 months for that particular trip to occur, so there was some time frames there. And as irony would have it, the day that she arrived in Barbados was also the day the last person that she accused of witchcraft was burned at the stake. Once she arrived in Barbados, she basically disappeared. No one knows what happened to her. They don't know if she lived a long and miserable life or if she died from the fever, and they're talking like yellow fever type stuff, shortly after arriving. Nothing is said about her. Like, she pops up out of nowhere, kills a bunch of people, and then gets banished to an island and then is forgotten about, which is really the best place for her to be, is be banished into the abyss. But there is a little part to her story that actually bugs me, and it bugs me a lot because it makes no sense. They found her to be a fraud, false accuser of people. They proved that she illegally murdered multiple people. Not one or two, multiple people. But instead of pardoning the accused people, who obviously were still alive when she was found out, they went ahead and burned them. I can't, I don't understand the logic here. Well, since we already have them chained up and they've already been tortured, let's just toss them in the pile. What? If you knew she was a fraud and you knew that she had done it wrong, why didn't you release them? What in heaven's name would possess you to still murder the people that this psycho had accused? I could not find a rhyme or reason for their purpose behind it, other than I'm pretty sure the entire system over there during this time period had lost its ever-loving mind. Oh, you are a fraud. We're going to condemn you to an island, but all those people that you fake accused, we're going to go ahead and burn them because, well, they're already here. But this is the kind of stuff that drives me insane, and this is the kind of stuff that needs, in my opinion, to be brought forward. We need to understand what was going on in this time period. These people were not thinking rationally. This was not a legal system based off of any form of logic. It was emotion, it was fear, there was a lot of greed, and there was a church out of control in this time. And I don't mean out of control like the government needs to control the church. The church was actively pursuing anyone who didn't agree with it, and if you happen to have two warring clans making accusations, in their mind, this just was fuel to their fire. They could make this work. This is why I have strong beliefs about religion and spirituality, is this kind of stuff. And I go over this every time, I'm sorry, I know, but this is where I just feel we really need to be paying attention to the stuff that's going on in our history so that we do not make the same stupid mistakes. Just because someone is different does not make them evil. Just because some psycho makes an accusation, we need proof. The judicial system is to be blind to emotion. It needs to be based on fact. These people were blatantly hurting, harming, and killing people with zero fact, with zero proof. Now, as I've said before, do I believe that there is an evil force out there, devil, demon, whatever you want to call it? Yes. Do I think that there are people who worship that? 100%. Do I think that they have marks on their body that indicate that bond? Not likely. But I'm also not going to go around stabbing him with a needle to find out either. That's between them and the hereafter. They can figure that out. As long as they don't bother me and I don't bother them, and same thing with they don't bother anyone who watches this, and they're not hurting anything, stay over there and do your evil. When you start affecting others, then someone needs to intervene, but you need to have proof that they're the ones doing it. Not, oh, well, I had this dream one time that this person was like hexing me, and it's like sweet little granny over in the corner eating an apple. What? How did that person hurt you? There's no logic, rhyme, or reason to what they were doing. It was all about greed. It was all about power and land grabs. And the more you dig into this, the less witches you actually find. That's the brutal truth of all of this. So, wrap this up before I get too big of a rant here. There are a couple of other fairly big names that I do want to go over. I'm not sure how this is going to work. This next month of November is going to be a little bit hectic, just life in general. I've got some shows I'm doing with my art, so there's going to be some shorter streams, I'm assuming, or some pre-recorded stuff. May not be as live as much as I'd like to be, but I do want to go over, but I want to dedicate the time to these bigger names, because these are people who actually made some very monumental issues in their time, and they caused a lot of death in their path. So that's going to be probably the wrap up, was these next few, the big names. When I get to them, that'll be the end of the witch trials primary work. But if you have anybody that you're interested in, you've heard of, you're kind of curious about, let me know. I will see what I can dig up. With that, I will let you guys go. Have a great rest of your evening, and have a safe upcoming week. The holidays are coming, so make sure you spend some time with your loved ones. Things are a little bit weird right now, and going over these kind of topics definitely make you want to go hug the people who are important to you. So spend some time with your family and your close friends over the next few weeks, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.